Welcome to a new video and a new camera comparison. Sony versus Sony. The Xperia Pro I with a 1-inch sized sensor against the brand new Xperia 1 Mark IV. Who has the better camera system? Let's get started. So let's talk about the camera setup. As you can see here, main difference is the 1-inch size sensor on the Pro I, but the Pro I also misses the periscope telezoom. It only has a 50 millimeter 2x zoom, and the 1 Mark IV has this 85 to 125 millimeter periscope telezoom with optical zoom, which is pretty cool. Otherwise, what we'll have here on the front is the 12 megapixel new camera module on the 1 Mark IV and the good old 8 megapixel front facing camera on the Pro I. And I think we will start with this to check out which one has the better video quality. We start off with the front facing camera of the Xperia Pro I, and it has 1080p full HD stabilization, and I think dynamic range should be also okay, but it's just full HD and an 8 megapixel sensor. Stabilization is okay. For vlogging I would still prefer 4K. The front-facing camera of the Xperia 1 Mark IV has 4K, 30 frames per second, has good stabilization, and I think also HDR is quite good. This one is more suited for vlogging because we have the higher resolution, and I think the 12 megapixel sensor in general is doing a better job than on the Xperia Pro I. And now we have the highlight of the Xperia Pro I, the 1-inch size sensor, even though it's not using whole 1 inch, but still you get the nice creamy bokeh, and it's perfectly for vlogging. I think stabilization is very good, and the only downside of this camera system right now is that you cannot zoom out or zoom into something. So if I want to show you something like those little motorboats going in there, you don't even see them. I can zoom in, but it's only a digital crop up to 72 millimeters, and it doesn't look so great. So what I have to do is to stop here, and then I can switch to the 50 millimeter that can also record in 4K, but you can see the motorboats are gone already. So the only thing I can show you is if I go here to the right, a nice little other boat that is coming here and passing by, but now I cannot switch to the ultra wide angle to show you my surroundings or something like this, so I have to stop again, and then I can show you the ultra wide angle here on the Xperia Pro I, which is pretty good, and I think the perfect vlogging camera system because it has autofocus, it has relatively good HDR still, and it has the perfect wide angle. So 60 millimeter is, I think, perfectly. It's not too wide that you get like too much in the shot, but it's like the perfect one for vlogging. What do you think about this one here? Write it down in the comments. Now let's compare it with the Xperia 1 Mark IV. So now I'm recording with the main camera lens of the Xperia 1 Mark IV, and the cool thing about this one is if I see this nice little ship passing by, I can just turn around and I have the ability to zoom in, and I can zoom in to 85 millimeters, and you can see here it has a nice smooth zoom. Maybe not so smooth as I would like it to be, and I can zoom in even to 5 times, and you can see much more detail of this ship passing by here with all the people on board. And if I want to, I can also say, okay, let's go back to 16 millimeters. It's zooming out then, and I have the ability now to show you the ultra wide angle 16 millimeters, which is a slightly improved version of the one on the Xperia Pro I. So it should have a bit better dynamic range, it should have a bit better resolution. It's a larger sensor than on the Xperia Pro I. In general, I think this one and the Xperia Pro I are very good for vlogging because of the 16 millimeter, because of autofocus. What do you think about stabilization, HDR and so on? Write it down in the comment section. And now let's take a look at some photos. Here we have it, the photos, always on the left Xperia Pro I, always on the right Xperia 1 Mark IV. I start with one request that I got: low ISO and shutter speed, the way that it looks very similar. ISO 100 on Xperia Pro I with the main sensor, and on Xperia 1 Mark IV it's ISO 64. Do we see any difference? Yeah, it's a bit brighter on the 1 Mark IV because I think I messed a little bit up with the shutter speed. I had to put the shutter speed a little bit higher here. As you can see, 1/200th of a second shutter speed here, 1/320th of a shutter speed but also f2 versus f1.7. So it's always hard. I was judging by histogram only, and ISO 100 versus 64. When we take a look at the noise or something like this, let's go to the side here. We can see not much of a difference, maybe a tiny little bit more noise on the 1 Mark IV, but it's very hard to judge. When it comes to sharpness, pretty close. Besides the little bit overexposure on the 1 Mark IV, this looks pretty nice, and the colors look pretty similar, but we can see a little bit warmer colors, not only darker, but a little bit warmer colors also on the Pro I. And this is something that you can see all over the place, and most likely in very low light shots, where you can see a lot warmer colors on the Pro I, much lighter colors on the Pro I, much higher exposure as well on the Pro I because of the larger, almost 1 inch size sensor, even if it's not using the whole 1 inch size sensor. A bit of greenish and more bluish kind of tint on the 1 Mark IV. In terms of detail level, much more noise on the 1 Mark IV. I think the sharpness and the detail level on the Xperia Pro I is a little bit better here than on the 1 Mark IV. And in the ultra low light, you can see the Pro I just beats the hands down the Xperia 1 Mark IV with its larger sensor. You can see much more details, the colors are there, and we have some color noise going on the 1 Mark IV, and the details are just lackluster on the 1 Mark IV. Zoom lens shot 2 times against 3.5 times shot. Just keep in mind more bluish kind of color also on the zoom lens, and a bit more yellowish kind of color on the Xperia Pro I. Xperia Pro I nice and sharp, nothing to complain about. It's pretty good for 2 times zoom. On the Xperia 1 Mark IV, I would have like said, it's not perfect yet. It's a bit unsharp here towards the middle, and the end it gets a bit more sharp, but this seems to be like a problem with the lens there, or maybe the software needs to be optimized. It is not as sharp as on the Xperia Pro I. The Xperia Pro I in this kind of shot, when it comes to clarity and sharpness, wins kind of zoom capabilities. The 1 Mark IV wins. Here's 5.2 times. You can see it doesn't really improve anything. When it comes to close-up shots, we can see in automatic mode that the Xperia 1 Mark IV has some overexposure issues sometimes. You can get a bit closer, you have then almost the same background blur, but still the background blur is much nicer on the Pro I, in my opinion, not as busy. When it comes to detail level and sharpness and autofocus, the 1 Mark IV has some issues with autofocus. I got a confirmation, but you can see that something was in focus there clearly, but I don't know really what. The Xperia Pro I perfectly autofocusing here, and a perfect exposure as well, so no issues there with this. When it comes to the ultra wide shot, for some reason it's a bit wider, a bit brighter on the Xperia Pro I, and a bit lower on, more contrasty on the 1 Mark IV. The 1 Mark IV, however, has the larger sensor. When we zoom in, however, you can see that slightly more sharpness towards the 1 Mark IV, especially here in the edge. When I go to this signage post here, you can see also in the green grass that there is a little bit of more sharpness going on the Xperia Pro I than on the 1 Mark IV, which is pretty interesting, which I did not expect, I have to say. Zoom shots 2 times against 3.5 times shot, where we can see, of course, we can read the top right here on the 2 times shot. Everything else is not readable. On the 3.5 times shot, we can read the top right, and even like some other exercises here, though you can see that the sharpness is falling towards the left, where this is a lot unsharper than the 2 is a lot sharper than the 1, and this is like something that we will also see when I go to 5.2 times. Same issue. Very nice that I can read it here, but yeah, and I can go also with the Xperia Pro I to 6 times zoom and compare it to 5 times zoom. You can see roughly, but yeah, there's no competition. The Xperia 1 Mark IV in terms of reachability with the zoom lens much better. 15 times zoom here, even more, and it is still readable here, even though yeah, it's not the best. When it comes to the main lens, you can see, yeah, it looks like almost on par. We have some color casting here of the sun, some sun flare effect on the lens. Might be just because the Xperia Pro I has the lens in the middle and the 1 Mark IV on the side. When it comes to the side, you can see also the color difference. We have a bit more, the railing is a bit more greenish kind of color, more yellowish kind of color, and also the pavement, and here's a bit more bluish, a bit more realistic on the 1 Mark IV, I have to say, because it was a bit more bluish, and the Pro I is tending towards warmer kind of colors. You can see also in the sky, where we have much warmer kind of colors and a much more realistic blue kind of color on the 1 Mark IV, because it really was this blue and not so much yellow involved. But the sharpness on the Xperia Pro I with its 1 inch sensor, and yeah, just probably the glass as well being a little bit better, is clearly there. The 1 Mark IV also with its 1.7 inch 1.7 aperture is a little bit softer here towards the side. When we go and zoom range difference here again with this little bird, you can see, of course, hands down, the 1 Mark IV is just simply stunning, especially because you can get nice background blur. Talking about background blur, I think the 1 Mark IV is keeping up with the Xperia Pro I here in this shot, where it focused a little bit more in the back, this more in the front. But yeah, more character I think I see with the Xperia Pro I, maybe because of this warmer kind of color, and I like it a bit more. But yeah, who's the winner here? Just tell me. And another shot with the ultra wide angle, where we clearly can see that the Xperia 1 Mark IV has the brighter shot, so the larger sensor is kicking in finally, and you can see a bit more details as well on this shot, especially towards the edges. So maybe this one shot that I did before had some kind of autofocus issues. Anyway, this is the ultra wide angle, this is the normal, where we can see a lot more yellowish kind of tint on the Xperia Pro I, but I have to say I like it more. It looks a little bit more, yeah, more warm, a little bit more reminding me of like a warm weather, where the Xperia 1 Mark IV is a little bit too cool in my opinion. We can just also see the difference between the f2 and f1.7. Foreground here unsharp, background sharp. Here the foreground and the background sharp, which is pretty interesting. Zoom lens capability, again you can see 2x zoom, not much of a background blur. Here it looks a little more artificial, a little bit more artistic I have to say, with a nice background blur at 3.5, and then 5.2 times, a lot better. The maximum 6 times here, you can see clearly the difference between the 5.2 and the 6 times. It's just looking better on the 1 Mark IV, and this we saw already, this is the 15 times, also a lot better. So in general, I like the Xperia Pro I a little bit better. The main sensor is better. The ultra wide angle seems to be like a mixed bag, but overall more reliable on the Pro I. And I like the color science on the Pro I a bit better. The zoom lens on the 1 Mark IV I like a lot better. If it would be sharper, this would be perfectly suitable. I really like to have an Xperia Pro 2 eventually with the zoom lens of the 1 Mark IV and the color science of the Xperia Pro I, and the main sensor of the Xperia Pro I, of course. So that's everything for the photo comparison. One cool new option on the Xperia 1 Mark IV is the wide range mode, which allows you in SDR even to record with computational photography a wider dynamic range, which is pretty cool, and that is yeah, something that the Xperia Pro I simply doesn't have. Though the Xperia Pro I has a bit of better background blur and bokeh, which the 1 Mark IV cannot compete with because of the smaller sensor size. But what do you think about this wide range mode? Only downside of the wide range mode is no stabilization, so I have to correct it in post-production. Gladly, the Google Photos app is doing a pretty good job in this. Here now some slow motion videos that show the new capability of the Xperia 1 Mark IV to shoot slow motion in 4K 120 frames per second on all camera sensors. So I'm using the telezoom here, but I also can use the ultra wide angle and the main angle. And this is something that the Xperia Pro I doesn't have, where it only supports 120 frames per second on the main sensor recording. What do you think about this capability? I think it's better, the Xperia Pro I or the Xperia 1 Mark IV. I think the main lens, still the Xperia Pro I has the better main lens, the better main sensor, and you can see it clearly. The 1 Mark IV is pretty good as well, but it's not beating the Xperia Pro I. When it comes to ultra wide angle, I think the 1 Mark IV is beating the Pro I, but only by a hair in terms of sharpness of the ultra wide angle. When it comes to zoom lens, however, the 1 Mark IV is definitely better because you can zoom in further, it is more useful, and you get this nice background blur. And yeah, Pro I has a 2x zoom, it looks okay, but as soon as you crop in a little bit more, it's falling apart and it cannot compete with the 1 Mark IV. Though, if you only want to zoom in 2 times, then of course the optical zoom of the Xperia Pro I is definitely better. What do you think? Write it down in the comment section. That's everything for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until the next time. Bye.